Oh, I didn't see you there. I'm guessing you're here because you want to learn something about thumb sucking, maybe pacifiers. Let's go up to my office. I'll show you a few things. Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Hendricks, a pediatric dental specialist in the United States. I have offices in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Los Angeles, California. Thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about non-nutritive sucking. I'm going to make the case for situations where it can be beneficial and how to do it in the best way possible, avoiding some of the pitfalls that can come along with it. I want to start off today with story time. I am a pediatric dentist after all. So let's start with one of my favorite stories, the Cautionary Tales of the Struwwelpeter by Heinrich Hoffmann. These are some classic German cautionary tales for children. And one of them in here is called The Story of the Thumbsucker. Okay, this is a story of a little boy named Conrad. Conrad's home and his mom is going to go out. And his mother says, Conrad, I have to go out. While I'm home, I need you to be a good boy and do not suck your thumb. Because if you do, the tailor is going to come with his big tailor scissors and he's going to cut your thumbs off. So, sure enough, Conrad's mom leaves, and what does Conrad do first thing? Pops that thumb in, he starts sucking his thumb. Well, no sooner does that start than the tailor comes running in with his scissors and snips off Conrad's thumbs right away. So a little later, Conrad's mom comes home, and what does she find? She finds Conrad there with no thumbs left. So this is obviously a really gnarly story, right? One that's really going to scare children. But the question I have is, why do we have a story that's this intense? What is it about thumb sucking that you need to have a story about cutting the thumbs off? It's that severe that we want to scare children. We want to make sure that they're not doing it. We're going to answer that question today, and then we're going to transition that. We're going to look at pacifiers as a replacement for thumb sucking, and we're going to look at how to make good choices around that in dealing with our own children or the children we work with in a professional setting. The first thing I want to do today is we need to define non-nutritive sucking. What is non-nutritive sucking? Non-nutritive sucking is when a kid, a baby, sucks on something other than a breast, or even a breast, but they're doing it not for the purpose of gaining nutrition or eating, right? So when our babies are born, they're born with an innate desire to suck and suckle. And this is obviously super important because this is how they're going to get the nutrition they need. And this is their food, this is their water, this is literally everything during early life. So this is a super important characteristic. However, for a lot of kids, that desire is not met and fully satiated through just feeding alone. So you'll have kids who they'll essentially use the breast as a non-nutritive sucking device, or you'll see other kids who will bring their thumbs into their mouth, or they'll suck on something else. I mean, we even have ultrasounds that show children sucking on fingers and thumbs prenatal. So we know that this desire is there, and we know it's going to happen. The problem is sucking on something irregular shaped like a finger or thumb can affect the way our mouth grows. The next principle we need to understand after non-nutritive sucking is we need to understand a little bit about how the face grows and how the palate develops, okay? So normally, here's my little infant skull. During development, your tongue rests against the roof of your mouth, puts pressure there during swallow, and balances or counterbalances the weight and pressure of the cheek muscles compressing down and helps scaffold and develop the upper jaw. So the upper jaw is going to grow, it's going to widen and flatten, it's going to expand, in partial due to the pressure it's receiving from the tongue as it presses against the roof of the mouth during swallow and during rest. Now, when we introduce something in there, let's say we introduce a breast is going to flatten out across the roof of the mouth, and it's going to fit that space really nicely. So it's going to have a very physiologic effect. It's not that dissimilar from just the tongue alone at rest. The problem we see with this developmental pattern is when we introduce something irregular, say a finger, right, thumb, whatever. As it comes in, And as it presses up into the palate, it changes the distribution of forces. So instead of kind of a flattish tongue pressing up against the mouth or the roof of the mouth and supporting the development of the palate, we might have something much more narrow. That's going to press upward. It's also going to be a lot more rigid. A thumb is much more rigid than a breast would be, or certainly than what the tongue is. So it's going to press upward. That upward force changes the way we're developing and can collapse in the palate. So what happens is your lower jaw, which is growing a little bit more under genetic control and is less affected by the forces around it, it's going to grow. You're going to narrow out this upper jaw. As it becomes too narrow, that's going to affect a few things. That's going to affect the nose. It also affects the eustachian tubes, which are the tubes connecting our ears. So if that palate becomes too narrow and high up from an unnatural force pushing against it, or too narrow of a force, we're going to collapse in the nose. That's this space right in here. The roof of the mouth is the floor of the nose. We're going to shrink that up. We're going to breathe less well through our nose. We're also going to kink the tubes, the eustachian tube that connects our ears in towards our inner head, which is going to cause an increase in ear infections. So we know kids who have habits have narrowed out palates. It pushes the front forward. If you have teeth, it's going to move the teeth out of place. It also causes increased ear infections. So when we come back to the original question, why did Heinrich Hoffmann write this horrible story about a kid getting his fingers cut off with scissors? Why? Because we didn't want to see those changes happen in the kid. Heinrich Hoffmann may not have known, hey, we're going to collapse the palate, we're going to narrow up the nasal passages, we're going to kink the eustachian tubes. He wasn't aware of that. We're flaring out. He could see the flaring of the teeth. He could see them sticking out when you saw a kid with a habit. And we knew that looked irregular, and that was bad. The visual sign was what told us that there was a problem. In fact, if you've seen my TikToks, you know in one of my first big TikToks, I made comments about how sucking habits can change the way you look, and people were not happy to hear that. But it does, it affects the way you look also. So these are super important factors. That's why we have these cautionary tales. So obviously, we would like to avoid our children from sucking their thumbs, their fingers, and having these habits, which we call pernicious habits. Okay, but we know children want to have a non-nutritive option for things to suck on. Enter the pacifier. As we get into pacifiers here, I want to bring up a couple other things. Non-nutritive sucking really does have its place for children. There are some benefits to it. You know, we talked about some of the negative things that can happen right away, but there are some upsides. And if you think about the upsides, one of the number one upsides is that it calms children. That when you meet that desire, you meet that reflex, it calms them down. In fact, 2023 out of the University of Texas, a really interesting study on the psychology of mothers, and it found that moms whose babies cried more often had significant increases in depression and anxiety and stress, okay? These are really important. Moms already have a lot to deal with. Depression, anxiety are not going to help that situation. So if we can do something to help children cry less, it can really help them and it can help their mental health. If your mental health is better, you're going to be a better parent. So the calming effect of a non-nutritive sucking habit, be it a pacifier, a thumb or something, can't be understated. It's actually very important. It can be super, super helpful. Another really helpful thing with a non-nutritive habit like a pacifier is it encourages nasal breathing, closes the mouth, gets you breathing through your nose. Breathing through the nose is the healthiest way for any person to breathe, and this encourages that. We also have research showing that sucking on a pacifier can reduce the incidence of SIDS, that's sudden infant death syndrome. So we have children who can die for unexpected reasons. We found a decrease in that in kids who are using pacifiers. So the American Academy of Pediatrics likes pacifiers for those reasons. So those are some pretty darn good reasons to think about using a pacifier. Children are going to be more calm. You're going to meet this need. You could potentially have less crying, reduce the risk of SIDS, and improve nasal breathing. These are all really, really good things. So how can we have our cake and eat it too? You know, how can we meet the need for the children and ourselves and also mitigate some of the downsides? The way we're going to do that is we're going to improve upon the traditional pacifier. So let's talk briefly about the history of pacifiers. Pacifiers have been around for thousands of years. We have some early pacifiers from archaeological digs from at least 3,000 years ago in Italy showing like little clay animals with little holes, like little like pigs and stuff. And they had like a place where you could put some honey in it, and that would encourage the kids to suck on it. And then later through time, different materials were brought into play. You either had people sucking on cloth, or you even had like carved bone, wood. There was ivory if you were rich. There was gold and silver and all sorts of different things kind of shaped so that a kid could suck on it. It wasn't until like the early 1900s when you saw the first like rubber pacifiers show up, something maybe similar to this guy right here. This is obviously a modern pacifier, but this is an all rubber pacifier, and we had the first modern pacifiers come onto the scene, and they kind of developed over the century. Now, what's interesting about them is for the longest time, pacifiers were largely this particular shape. This shape here looks like this, or like this. Here's another example. This is referred to as cherry shape. And in the dental studies where we've looked at the effects of different shapes of pacifiers, this is the cherry shape. And this is normally the shape that we use to be considered the bad shape. For our purposes today, we'll kind of look at a few different shapes and how they affect the kids and how they interplay with the mouth, okay? So let's start with this one. This is probably the first pacifier your kid receives. Certainly if you're born in the United States, most hospitals are going to give you this pacifier as like a welcome to life gift bag or whatever they give the kids. They're going to give you one of these. We had some in my house when our children were born as well. And this is an interesting pacifier. This is a very specific pacifier that serves a specific purpose that very few people understand what that is. I think feeding therapists will recognize it, but outside of feeding therapists, maybe lactation consultants, most people don't have any clue. They just think this is a good pacifier because the hospital gives it to you. Well, the thing about it, it's supposed to approximate the shape of a nipple. And you and I all know, if you've seen a nipple, and you probably have, guess what? They might look somewhat like this until a kid starts sucking on it. Once a kid starts sucking on this nipple, it's going to deform, elongate, and flatten, and the human nipple is going to look very, very different from this. But this is used in this nipple shape because it can stimulate a child who's having struggles with feedings. So they like these in a lot of neonatal units. If young babies, maybe premature babies, whose suckle reflex isn't quite there, they're struggling to feed, they can take this. It's hollow. You can put your finger in it. You can actually reach in the mouth. You can use it to help stimulate that child and try to get that suckle reflex going. Because of its shape and a little bit of its rigidity, because it doesn't flatten, as the children try to suck on it, it forces them to use a little bit more strength. And in a child where you have lack of strength, you're trying to build that so you can feed effectively, that can be a really nice tool. But that's kind of where the benefits of this particular pacifier end. Once you get outside of it, like a specialist feeding scenario, these things aren't that good. In fact, it was this exact style of pacifier that sparked my entire foray into social media about pacifiers. I was at the Albuquerque airport one day walking through security, and I saw a toddler come walking by with his family, and he had one of these pacifiers. They had a clip on it, clipped onto this tab here. It was clipped to his shirt. This thing was in that child's mouth. And all I could think was, oh no, that is a terrible pacifier for that kid. That kid is much too old. If you look at these, this particular one says Soothie recommended 0 to 3 months marked on it. Well, the problem is kids get used to a certain shape and they like it. We want to soothe them. Well, you don't have the soothing effect if you switch to a shape that the child doesn't like. So the kids start with this, and many kids get this even though they don't have feeding problems. They start with it, and now they won't quit. So this kid obviously had a bad habit, and I thought, oh my gosh, that kid's mouth is going to look so bad. I should make a video about that. That would be something I could get out there because I was trying to get messages out about different things that I thought were interesting within pediatric dentistry. Well, I got back to my clinic a few days later, and in walks another child. That child, I look in their mouth, and you know what I see? This mouth right here. This completely collapsed little dental arch. And I was like, Mom, what is your child sucking on? Pacifier. This kid has all of their primary teeth erupted. That means this child is probably at least 2 years old based on just where the teeth are. And I said, I'm doing some work on pacifiers. Would you mind if I got a scan of your child's mouth? The parent consented. I took my little computer scanner and I was able to pretty much get this thing scanned. I got it together and I came out, we printed it, we got it copied into stone, and I took the pacifier I had and placed it into this mouth, and it fit perfectly, an absolute perfect fit into the arch. And right there you can see the damage that can happen. If we go back and you recall what I said about the growth and the way the tongue is scaffolding the growth, if I replace that tongue with a stiff, small pacifier nipple and I put that thing in there and I leave it long enough with enough intensity and duration, I'm going to collapse my upper jaw into something that looks like this. Now, if you took a normal dental arch that this thing should fit with, you would see the upper jaw collapses inside the lower jaw. It no longer fits on the outside as it should, and it flares out the upper teeth and leaves a big gap there. So there's the visual deformity from it, but also the internal changes that happen with this. When you collapse in your palate like this and get it so high, your tongue no longer becomes capable of moving up to the top of it to support it. So you create a deformity that can no longer allow for proper growth. So the problem continues. So even though you've stopped the habit, this doesn't go back. The front teeth might fall back into place under pressure from the lip, but the changes you've made to the palate aren't going to change, which means the internal changes to our palate here and the stuff deeper within our nose, the things that affect our full physiology, they're not changing. Many people think, oh, I stopped the habit, the teeth stuck out. I stopped the habit, the teeth came back. My kid's fine. No, they're not. Only what you can see looks better, so you assume it's fine when it really isn't. These other style of pacifiers, so this cherry shape, we looked at this one called a soother, right? This narrow one. We know that this is no good, but we also have this cherry shape. This is pretty common. You see these everywhere. To me, these look kind of like the ring pops. I don't know if you all had those as children, but you stick a little ring on, it's big like ball or diamond of candy. It kind of looks like that to me. These also have the potential to cause a lot of deformity to the mouth. They are not quite as stiff as this one. The difference here is that they kind of bulb out into this space. And I think the idea is that you would think, you look in the mouth, you're like, okay, so here I have I have an infant mouth right here in my hand. And I might think, okay, this infant mouth is going to fit on this and it's going to kind of fill up and fill into the space of the palate. The problem is the palate is not shaped like this. This creates a really unnatural shape. Also, as the tongue comes underneath to rest up against it, it presses the tongue low in the mouth. And as you're sucking, it builds a pattern where you're sucking and keeping the tongue too low in the mouth. And we know that the tongue needs to be resting up near the roof of the mouth. So this can affect the way that you're swallowing, which again, over time is going to affect the size, shape of the mouth and the way it's developing. So this cherry shape is really, really not good. If we want the benefits of non-nutritive sucking, we would like our kids to have a pacifier, but we really don't want to cause trouble by collapsing the internals of the nose. We don't want increased ear infections. We certainly don't want flared teeth. We don't want the other problems associated with it. Like, what can we do? Well, what we really need is we need a much better design. And if we think about the principles of orthodontics, that can really help us. So in orthodontics, we change the shape of the mouth and the position of the teeth by applying pressure through different appliances, right? Appliances, examples would be braces or an appliance. Invisalign would be an appliance. Sometimes different retainers are referred to as appliances that can snap in or glue in, and you can change them and adjust them, and it changes the size and shape of the mouth. And it does that especially well in growing kids. Those same principles need to be taken into consideration when we're talking about a pacifier. If we have a poor shape and we apply force over a poor shape, we're going to get distortion. But if we could have a better shape that more supports the natural physiology of the mouth, then we could get a better development. And that's why I'm a big fan of this particular pacifier. This is the Nook orthodontic pacifier. And when I was a young dentist and I had my oldest son, he was born, I bought the Nook orthodontic pacifier from the store because it said orthodontic. And I was like, oh, orthodontics are good. That's a good thing. And, certainly in my career, orthodontics, good. Therefore, I'm going to buy this pacifier. It was only later as I really looked at it closely and better understood the growth and development in a young kid that I knew just how good it was. So I want to look at some of the design elements of this particular pacifier and why it's so much better, and how proper use of this, I think, can help enhance the growth and development of our kids versus one of these pacifiers with a much poorer shape. So the first thing I want to talk about is we're going to address the flare of the front teeth. We all know you have something big sticking in there, it's going to flare the front teeth. Let's just remind you of the thumb sucking flare. Here's a kid from my practice recently who sucked his thumb all the time. Look at this gap. This kid couldn't damage a hot dog if you gave it to him and told him to bite it with his front teeth, right? He's got this huge gap up here. So that's from the thumb's constant presence, not allowing these teeth to come in. So one of the first things about a better pacifier design is the entry point into the mouth has to be smaller. By having a big wide entry point, like say this guy, you have this wide entry point, that's too wide. So you look at this, okay, this thing here measures about 11 millimeters in terms of width there. That's really, really wide. That's very similar to a young kid's thumb or finger. That's not good. That's going to flare things out. Even some of these modern pacifiers that are cherry shaped, we measured their entry points on the caliper here. We're still like 9, 10 millimeters in these gaps. That's much too big. The 9, 10 millimeter gap here is huge. Let's look at, this is obviously a much older kid who's using a thumb, but his gap created here from his habit is right about 9 millimeters. So that shows you what 9 millimeters looks like in real life. That is a big, big gap. So something that this particular Nook pacifier does that's really great is the entry point's very, very narrow. So I bring my caliper to that and I measure that thing at its narrow point. We're measuring that at 4 millimeters. So that's less than half the size of the other pacifiers. You have a very narrow entry. That is going to put less pressure on the teeth. So if you have a child with teeth, child growing teeth into their mouth who's using a pacifier, you're not going to push them outward as aggressively. You're going to put very little pressure into them. And this 4 millimeters, like the other ones too, but it's very soft, it can compress down, so potentially your spread is even less. The next thing that this pacifier does is it bends after the entry point. The portion that fits in the palate bends upward, and you get an upward bend to it, and it rounds out, so it's going to fit the natural anatomy of a dental arch really, really well. So here's a dental arch from an infant that we scanned, and if we take that and we place it over this, I can see really clearly. It's hard to show in the video. We'll try our best here, but you can see how the pacifier is going to reach right up in, it's going to rest right up in that arch, and this curvature really fits the natural anatomy of kind of a more idealized widened palate. That's excellent. The next thing that happens on here is on the underside, we have a concavity on the underside of this pacifier. It curves in, it's got a nice concave shape. That allows for the tongue to rest up there in a very natural position where it's going to feel much more like the tongue is resting against the roof of the mouth. That's really important, because if we have a big bulb, this one here, this one's very bulbous too, has a more narrow entry, but this is a different design by another company, got a big bulb. That bulb is going to press the tongue down, and it's going to encourage a low tongue posture. I don't want a low tongue posture. I want my tongue to rest up near the roof of the mouth. So this is going to allow that and encourage a much better oral posture. If we can encourage a better oral posture when it's not present, we're going to be in a better rest position. When we are using it, we're encouraging some of these habits that are really beneficial to us in terms of our long-term growth. So in conclusion here, as we wrap it up, the factors that really affect non-nutritive sucking and the negatives that come from that are going to come from frequency, duration, and type of habit, okay? We know fingers, thumbs are really bad. One, you can't take them away. You can't call the tailor and have him lop them off. But since most of us aren't going to do that, you can't take them away. That's a very hard habit to break as the kids get older. So in my opinion, pacifiers far superior for that. Pacifier can be removed when you want the child not to use it. Now, with a pacifier, you need to make sure that you're using a design that's going to be supportive of the natural growth of a child and complement it, and not disruptive the way some of these other ones might be. If you're not using a tool for a feeding purpose, this is just going to be really destructive. So we want to use a complementary shape. And then the other thing we have to understand is with duration and intensity, those are going to be factors that affect it. We need to help control the timing of when the kids use these. I tell people pacifiers are great, but they're very specific tools. Use them when you need them. If you're trying to achieve a calming effect, if you're trying to meet a need of your child, use it. But don't just use it by default. When I see older kids walking around with them clipped on their shirt, I understand, I know you don't want it to drop and fall on the ground, but it's too convenient. It's always there. I see some people and it's like they always want it in their kid's mouth. It doesn't need to be in your child's mouth all the time. Encourage it when you need it. Use them to calm. Use it to fall asleep. After the kids are asleep, if they can breathe through their nose, take it out. Take it out. Let them rest in a natural position. That's where they need to be. Use it as a tool. So don't use it all the time. That's one of the biggest mistakes I think people make. If you use something all the time, it doesn't matter how good the design is, you can still cause problems because overuse of anything is not good. Overuse of braces, not good. Overuse of anything that can change in our mouth is not going to be a healthy thing. So what we want to do is use it in an important way, in a very thoughtful way. Let's be intentional in the way we're using our pacifiers. Now, if our kid does have a non-nutritive habit that we can't break, like thumbs, fingers, whatnot, there are other avenues we can reach out for that. You know, we can always make every effort at home. The internet's full of great ideas. There's a lot of therapists who work specifically with children who can really help that. Pediatric dentists can be helpful. There's a lot of resources out there to address your kid on a specific, like one-on-one. But non-nutritive sucking can be really helpful, and it's something that your children most likely are going to want to do. So let's be intentional about it. Let's take control of the situation and let's help them and help them get their most optimal outcome, because that's all any of us really want for our children anyways, to have the best possible outcomes. Thank you guys for joining me today. Hope you learned something. Hope you had fun. Hope you got to see some of these really cool real world examples I have here. There's a lot of research on this stuff out there. If you want to dig deep, you can contact me or others, and we can help steer you towards the scientific literature that supports all the stuff I'm doing today. Thank you. Oh, that's a nice pacifier, isn't it? Oh yeah, that's nice. That's a good one.